If you have a scary story you'd like to hear on the channel, then go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, thank you. I used to work at a restaurant that was open pretty late, but it was also attached to a bar that was open till midnight. When the restaurant closed, the bar stayed open and served some menu items, but not everything. It was normal for people to go to the bar and order appetizers and drinks, but they always pushed hard to get people to order more than that on the restaurant side. They had a rewards program where you could get a free appetizer after 10 visits, so when they redeemed that, the manager always nagged us to push them on ordering a meal or even a dessert to try and recover the cost, I guess. Their beliefs, not mine or the other servers. So anyways, it was one of those shifts that I worked until midnight, so I was going to be moving over to the bar side. I remember it was almost 10 p.m. because that was when the restaurant closed and we just had a couple, a male and female, come in and they specifically asked to sit at one of the tables near the front doors. This was actually pretty uncommon because most people wanted to sit in the booths which lined the sides or in the back. It wasn't something that caused me to become suspicious of them or think they were weird or anything. It was just a change of pace is all. So I got them seated, started to hand them a menu when they said they didn't need one, and asked if they could just get the chips and salsa appetizer and 2 waters with lemons. Again, people did that a lot, so I didn't question it and took their order to the back. However, here are the things I did find a bit odd. Since it was so close to closing, I did find it weird that they didn't just go to the bar side for chips. Those people typically went over there anyways, and those that just ordered an appetizer usually sit around and talk for a few hours. So part of me was a little whiny when I started thinking that they were going to keep me here on this side longer, causing me to run behind on cleaning. We weren't allowed to sweep or even vacuum the floors if there were any customers in the dining area, so I would have to wait till they were done before I could finish. But the other thing I noticed was that both of the shirts they were wearing still had the tag hanging on them, right under the arms. I saw his when he was pushing the menu back at me, and when I brought out their drinks, she was tucking hers into the shirt. Again, it was weird, but I also had heard stories where people bought stuff and kept the tags on it so they could return it. Not my thing, but to each their own. I saw him tapping on the little table kiosk, so I figured he was redeeming the appetizer anyways. So if they were just cheap, so be it. I made better tips on the bar side anyways. After I brought out the drinks, I walked by them once to let them know their food would be out shortly, and they were very short and quick to dismiss me. Again, whatever. They were going to be that kind of customer, then we'll just get through it and move on with my night. However, my boss did not see it that way. He had been pacing the kitchen, and when he still didn't see a ticket come back for them, the only other occupied table was already eating, he questioned me about it, becoming impatient as he was wanting to go home too. There was another manager on the bar side, so unlike me, he was going to just be going home. I told him they didn't want any entrees, they just wanted the appetizer. He became annoyed that he was being held back because someone wanted something that they could just get from the grocery store across the street. Again, his words, not mine. He then told me to go and offer something to them, like a beer or the daily soup or something, to try and get some money out of them. Reluctantly, I did what he asked of me. As I approached the table, I noticed they were leaning in and talking quietly, but then quickly stopped when we made eye contact. I didn't want to do this as is, So I tried to be a bit chill about it, mentioning we had a new chili recipe and offered some, when the guy snapped back, "We just want our chips, man, that's it." So I smiled and said no problem, promising I would be right back with it. I went back to the kitchen and told the boss that was a no-go and started to grab their chips. He became more annoyed and told me to keep an eye on them, thinking they were just going to run out without paying. I tried to argue that they were probably just going to redeem the rewards, but he didn't like to be wrong. So I brought them their food and went back to the kitchen and talked with the chef. I don't know what was up with my boss that night. He was usually an ass, but he was worse than usual. He would not let up on this couple. He stopped pushing the food thing because I guess he realized that would have kept him there longer, but he was adamant that they were going to do a dine and dash since they got a refill and sat close to the door. So I was told to do a walk by every couple minutes, and I mean literally 2 minutes max. The couple seemed to be just as annoyed as I was because the last time I approached them, the guy went off. But it was what he said that was concerning. I walked up to the table and was going to mention paying at the kiosk when the guy yelled, in a cleaned up version mind you, "Dude, leave us the hell alone. We're only here for an alibi, for Christ's sakes." He said this as if it was something a normal person would say, shoving another chip in his mouth. The woman would not make eye contact with me and continued to look down at the table. I just walked away and told my boss what they said, yelling at him that if he was still worried about it, then he could go talk to them himself. I refused to go back to the table, pissed off and also a little freaked out. Why would you say that out loud, and what would you need an alibi for? I told the chef about what was said, and I just walked by the doorway to see if they would leave a card or cash or something. However, we got the notification on the screen in the back that the chips were redeemed, leaving them with no bill to pay. So I checked again for them and saw them take off out the front door. I went to their table, noticed they took their receipt and nothing else. After that, I just cleaned up, still replaying the event in my mind. The rest of that night went fine, and thankfully, I never saw that couple again. But I contemplated reporting it to the authorities just in case there was something more sinister behind that comment. I was hoping he just said that to get me to leave them alone, because if not, it was pretty dumb. When they redeem their reward, it shows us the email address, name, and phone number for the account that was logged in. Sure, all of it could have been fake, but there was still a chance that it was real and could trace back to one of them. I held on to the info for the time being until I heard reports about some car break-ins where someone had been shot and killed. One of them had happened that same night and was within the same general area. That was enough to at least report it to the police, just in case it could be related. Unfortunately, if it was, I never found out. I never heard anything about the case or from the cop that took my statement, so I have no idea. I still think about it at times, wondering how real that statement he made was, and also hoping they don't think I'm a risk and try to find me. At least, I don't work there anymore or even in the same state, so I'm probably safe. My story is one that is pretty messed up, and I'm not saying that lightly. This was probably the lowest point of my life and was absolutely something that gave me some sort of PTSD, but it's an important story for me to tell to the world, in my opinion. I was abused and mistreated by this person, and it's a bumpy ride, so if that's not something you can stomach, I don't recommend reading the rest of this. I dated a guy named Cole for most of my time in high school. I met him at the end of my freshman year, and we actually started dating at the beginning of my sophomore year, and we were together until we graduated. Neither of us was one of the popular kids, and neither of us really stood out of the crowd, so we just kind of really enjoyed each other's company and being together with someone that was like me and really nice. Well, that's what it was on the outside, at least. To everyone in the school, my parents, in the public eye, we were just two shy high school kids that liked to hold each other's hands. In private, however, he was emotionally manipulative and horribly controlling. My home life wasn't great. My parents argued nonstop, and they were always so aggressive with each other. So I guess as I was growing up, I kind of connected that to love. So when Cole started doing the same thing to me that they did to each other, I thought it was normal. It didn't take long for that emotional manipulation to turn into physical abuse and then sexual abuse. Basically, if he wanted to do something, we would just do it, and I had to accept it because he loved me, and that was that. This went on for over a year and a half, until spring break of my senior year. I spent the week over at my grandmother's house in an attempt to get away from him, even for just a little bit, though I framed it that I hadn't spent time with Granny for a while, which was true. While I was there, my grandma actually saw a bruise that was on my inner thigh, and the whole thing spiraled. I broke down and told her everything. She was horrified to hear what had been happening between us, but once she calmed me down, she basically told me that I needed to exit the relationship as quickly as I could. We talked about it some more, and I agreed with her. She had convinced me that I needed to get away from Cole, and I needed to get away as soon as possible. Once spring break was over, he came over to my house, and I was adamant that we needed to spend time in the living room instead of my room, because I knew what would happen if we went behind closed doors. Throughout the evening, I just kind of sat alone on the couch and kept my distance while I prepared for what I had to do, and then, once he had to leave, I ended up telling him that I thought we should take a break from each other. I saw by the look on his face that he wanted to smack me, something he had pretty much turned into his rebuttal when he thought what I said was wrong, but he didn't, because my mom was in the other room and he had to keep up his good kid appearances. He asked me if I was sure I wanted to do that in a way that almost sounded threatening, but I nodded and said that I enjoyed our time together, but that I needed some time to think things through. He basically just left after that, but he did not leave me alone. He was dead set on winning me back in some way, whether that meant by telling me how much I meant to him or telling me that I would be sorry for what I had done. I tried my best to ignore the notes, the letters in the mailbox, the constant phone calls, but I couldn't ignore the literal brick through my window. Yes, he literally threw a brick through my window, complete with a small note that said, "I love you, Kayla, and I will die without you," complete with his signature. Thankfully, that was enough to make this whole thing a lot easier, as my dad called the cops and he was subsequently arrested because he admitted that he did it. I was actually happy that this happened because I would be able to move on, focus on school, and he wouldn't be there to distract or bother me. I thought that was where it would all end. He was charged, told to stay away, and I finished high school without any issues. After I graduated, I moved out and then moved in with my grandparents and went to college. I spent 4 years furthering my education and lived with them, then went and got my own place a few miles from their house at an apartment complex down the way. I lived there for 6 years, so at this point, I had been on my own for a decade, had started my own career, and had met a guy that I was dating, and things were pretty serious. Basically, I had moved on with my life, and I was happy despite what I had gone through. Recovery was difficult, but I felt like I had successfully managed to do so. Unfortunately, things went south really fast one random day when I got a phone call from a number I didn't know. I answered it, and I wish that I hadn't. As soon as I said hello, the voice on the other end said, "Hey, Kayla, it's Cole," in a tone that was way too excited to be on this call. As soon as he said my name, my blood ran cold, and there were legitimate chills running down my spine. This was a voice that I never wanted to hear again, and the fact that he had somehow found my phone number was something else altogether. I kind of sheepishly said hi, and then asked what he wanted. He laughed when I responded, then said something like, "Don't sound so excited to talk to me," then started in with what he was calling for. He asked me if I would be a reference for a job that he was applying for, because he needed someone to tell them that he was a good person and willing to do the work. I basically just said okay and wrapped the call up as quickly as I could. The feeling in my stomach was literally the worst thing that I had felt since he and I were together. I ended up telling my boyfriend what had happened, and thankfully he was fully supportive and willing to keep me calm and talk me through the situation. At the end of it, he pretty much told me that I should just not answer any numbers that I didn't recognize and just move on and pretend that it never happened. He then said that if I wanted, we could go up and change my number. I told him that it was okay and that I would just not answer any more calls that I didn't know. That would have been a great solution and would have been enough if what happened next didn't happen. About a week after that happened, I went into the office to work, and sitting in the lobby was Cole. I opened the door and literally just froze the second I saw him. My heart was racing, and I'm pretty sure I started hyperventilating because I was feeling dizzy. As soon as he saw me, he stood up and walked over to me, grabbing me and pulling me into a hug. I had no idea what to do. I just stood there, frozen, with his arms around me and not letting go. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to literally just stop existing. He was talking in my ear about how much he'd missed me since high school, how happy he was to see me. He said that he was there for an interview to work in the IT department, which was the department that I worked in, and said that he was so excited that he may be working with me. Then what he said made my heart stop. It could be just like old times. As soon as he said that, I immediately pulled myself away from him and walked away as quickly as I could to go and talk to my manager. I walked into his office, and I knew that he could see something was wrong because he stood up and asked if I was okay. I let loose, asking him if there was someone named Cole that was there for an interview. He told me that he was, and that he was there to interview for a position that was on our team, and then asked if I knew him. I explained everything to him. I pretty much just dumped the entirety of my trauma on him and told him that Cole was the cause of it. He then followed that up with saying that he would keep that in mind and asked me if I had a restraining order on Cole. I knew what this meant. It meant that he did not care and that he was going to proceed as if I never told him any of this. The restraining order question was a matter of covering himself legally. I told him no, and he ended the conversation pretty much right away. I went back to my desk, but I think I spent most of that day in the bathroom just staring at the wall and having a panic attack. That was the last day that I worked there, because I knew what was going on. Some of you may say that it was purely coincidence that he was interviewing for the same company that I was working at, but it wasn't. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He never once said anything about not knowing I worked there, and his comments made me feel more like he knew it, and he was trying to pretend like he didn't. I know it sounds paranoid, but he got my number. He went to my office. He interviewed for a position on my team. None of this was a coincidence. Like I said, I ended up quitting that day. Didn't even put in my 2 weeks just in case. I wasn't willing to give him any more time around me. I also went and changed my number after that day, so he didn't have it. Thankfully, this time around, I had more of a support system in place. My boyfriend, my grandparents, and a few friends. They all supported me in my decision, and they helped me get my mind straight. So that's it. That's the story of my horrible ex that showed up randomly in my life 10 years later. It was hard to get through, and I still feel like someday he's going to show back up in my life to cause me more distress. Thankfully, he hasn't. If he ever does, I'm honestly not sure what I'll do or what it'll do to me. Whenever I was 18, I met this girl in an online game that lived in a different state about 17 hours away. We talked for months about anything and everything and got to know each other and became really good friends. We shared pictures and even video chatted, so we knew we were the real person in the pictures. After a while, it became more than just a friendship, and we gave long-distance dating a try. We promised each other after we graduated that we would save up money and fly to be together in person. At the time, I had been working with my dad at a shop he owned part-time while I was in school. Then, instead of finding another job, I decided I would start working there full-time to save up more money. When you don't have to drive to work and still live with your parents, you tend to have extra spending money. I was thankful they let me stick around though. So, after a few months, I bought a ticket and flew out to see her. It was definitely nerve-wracking at first. Not seeing this person before, but it was a lot of fun. We did a lot of things like going to the movies. She suggested some of her favorite restaurants and parks and got to play the same game together next to each other where we first met. I was there for about a week, but I loved it there. I loved the area. I loved the neighborhood. I loved the weather. It was late summer, early autumn, and it wasn't hot and humid like it was where I lived. I also fell even harder for her. So, as some young people in love do, we started making plans for me to move there. She was currently living with her mom, so we could both save up money to get a place of our own. After I went home, we started looking for places to apply and move to, and started saving for the fees, deposits, and moving expenses. Now, I did have some belongings that I, of course, wanted to bring with me, as well as a car, so flying was going to be out of the question this time. It took us a little longer than we wanted to, but we had some things come up and halt our process, but we were finally ready to sign for the move in the next spring. So it was my turn to pack all my stuff up and drive out there to start my life. I also figured once there, I could look for a job and maybe even go to college or something if I found something I wanted to pursue. Now, of course, I'm 19, almost 20, full of excitement and love, and thought, sure, I'll be tired when I get there, but I could totally drive the 17 or so hours in one sitting and be fine. So I packed up my car and went to bed early the night before. I got up and had some coffee with my parents. Mom was still a little hesitant and worried about me going alone, but my dad was pretty happy for me. I grabbed some things to eat and energy drinks the day before as well, so I gave my parents hugs goodbye and headed out. Finally, I was on the road and felt really good about myself and my future. I had music blasting. Katie called me a few times to see how I was doing and helped myself to some snacks to keep me going. I was definitely a little overconfident though. This was the first time I had driven by myself longer than an hour, and didn't really know how to pace myself. I also had trouble sleeping that night as I was so excited and nervous, so I ended up sleeping in longer than I wanted and also got held up talking with my parents, so I left later than I wanted. I was about 12 hours in and was starting to feel it. I could feel my eyes getting heavy. It was already dark, and I was on a long stretch of highway that didn't have any exits coming up soon. I called Katie to talk to her for a bit, even though I shouldn't talk on the phone while I was driving, but it was at least keeping me awake. She did, however, convince me to stop and sleep though, just to make sure I was okay and didn't get into any accidents. So I did end up speaking to her till I found an exit that literally only had a gas station on the sign. I said I was just going to pull into that parking lot and sleep there for a few hours, then get back on the road, so we said goodnight and I made my way to the gas station. I followed the arrow to the right from the exit, like the sign said, but there was no gas station. I ended up finding a gravel path that led to just a concrete slab in a small shack-like building. There was no pump or any sign of one. The dilapidated building had a white sign that went across the top, but there was no text. It looked like this was once a gas station, or maybe just a convenience store, but definitely wasn't at this point. While it looked a little creepy, I was too tired to care, so I got out to relieve myself before I went to sleep, then got back in my car. But as I was laying there, preparing to doze off, I got a strong smell of sulfur. It was just weird being where I was, so I got up and looked around and didn't see anything. I wasn't the smartest at the time, but since I didn't immediately see anything and didn't care to check that building, I just made sure my doors were locked, tried to ignore the smell, and went back to sleep. I don't think I ever went into a deep sleep, or the dreams were very surreal because I started hearing what sounded like someone rubbing against my car, like running their hand and nails along the side of it. I opened my eyes and continued to stare at the roof of my car, trying to process what was happening. That's when I started hearing whispering. I couldn't make out what was being said or if it was even words or English for that matter, but I again sat there listening, not knowing what to do. But when I began hearing them pull on the passenger door handle, that's when I sat up really quick. I looked over at the passenger door and didn't see anything. The whispering, the noises, it all stopped. I was pretty much parked parallel to the building, so I looked over to see if someone may have ran in there to hide, but I didn't see anything. Again, I was stupid and tired at the time, and feeling like I could take on anything that had the gall to mess with someone's car while they were in it, I decided to check it out and confront them. Don't worry, I still regret it to this day. The front of it just had a small door with a window that was almost impossible to see through. I could, however, make out a small counter and shelves along the back. I tried to reach for the door and, to my surprise, it was unlocked. I started to slowly pull it open when I heard a blood-curdling scream come from inside. I looked up to see someone completely naked and nearly skin and bone run from the right side and jump and tumble over to the other side of the counter. I let go of the door and immediately ran back to my car. I locked the door, staring at the building to see if anyone would run over to my car when I heard a bang at my hatchback. I looked back to see another, or maybe the same man, trying to climb on top of my car. My thought was, I was in the middle of nowhere. No one knows really where I am, so if anything happened to me, what was I supposed to do? So with only a few hours of sleep, I started my car and burned out of the parking lot, watching the guy kind of tumble backwards away from my car. I got on the road and was shaking, trying to start the navigation back up, but not wanting to stop. I finally got it started and drove the rest of the way, fully awake. I was terrified that they may try to come after me. There weren't any cars around from what I remember, but I didn't know if there was someone waiting or what. When the sun was finally peeking up, I called Katie and told her I was already back on the road and that I was a few hours out. I think she could tell something was wrong, so I pulled over to explain what had happened. She was trying to assure me that it was probably just a homeless person that took over the place and I probably spooked them too. I mean, it did make sense to me at the time, so I calmed down, found an open gas station to stop and get some more coffee and get a hold of myself. She had me send her my location so she could at least know where I was, something we should have done in the first place, and then I left again. By the way, being able to send your coordinates to someone via text is an incredible tool and a very good safety measure. Anyways, I finally got there with no further issues or scares, and after having lunch, slept for the rest of the day. The kicker though was the next day when Katie told me that I actually wasn't too far from an asylum of some sort. It was on the same road, but probably a few miles up. So I may have come in contact with a patient that got loose maybe? I'll never know because I never went back to look for them. It was just an all-around unpleasant experience, and I wouldn't suggest driving alone at night in some unknown area outside of civilization to anyone. So that, my friends, was another collection of scary stories. I feel like it's been a minute since we just did a random mix like this, so there we go. Everyone has a place and we'll always make it work. And if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment on your thoughts or let me know, do y'all have any hobbies? Anything you like to do for fun? And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a good rest of your week. And until next time, take care.